She's also a social worker here in the district. Um, I will actually start over if that's okay, Alicia, since we just started the recording. Okay, so good morning. Welcome to the 2020 Trauma Institute. We're excited to have you. This is a breakout session in that institute titled Educators and Secondary Stress, How to Respond to Your Own Secondary Stress Response. This training is facilitated primarily to help educators, but can help anyone in the helping professions dealing with secondary stress. So my name's Laura DiPolito. I'm a school social worker for Schenectady City Schools. This is my 15th year starting in the district and my 25th year as a social worker in the city of Schenectady. I am delighted to be joined by Alicia Backus. She's also a school social worker, and she's going to be hosting this event and facilitating your questions. If you have questions, what we would ask is that or comments, we welcome that. This is actually the kind of conversation that we want to start having with more educators overall. So there's going to be opportunities for feedback. Alicia can see your comments in the feedback box. I'm not sure I can as we get going and get rolling. So if you make sure that your comments go to all, that way Alicia can make sure I see that and will point it out to me if I've missed anything. There'll also be some time for questions and answers at the end, as well as I work for Schenectady City Schools, so you can always email me. I'm also the TCIS facilitator for getting trainings out, so very accessible to you if you need any ongoing support. Okay, well, welcome. And why are we here? Why are we talking about secondary stress? I'm going to share with you that the reason I got really interested in this topic a few years ago, most of my friends are educators. And what I noticed is they would come to me and tell me these really horrific stories about things that children had experienced in their classrooms. And the teachers were really absorbing the content of it and having some really sad responses of their own and needing to talk about what had happened and to their students. And it was really impacting my friends. And I could see it, not just impacting them at school, but like impacting them in our personal lives. We're going for walks and they're still talking about this stuff. And you know, as a therapist, I kind of thought, oh, I really wish we could get more education to folks about how to take care of themselves in this, because when I was in graduate school, they taught us about that for social workers. And then I had like an aha moment, actually, a few moments after that, and went, you know, I'm not really immune to this either. And this comes up for me. This is something that we have to do frequent check-ins on, because it's not a one-shot deal. You can't get vaccinated against secondary stress and have, you know, an immunity to being stressed from the stories that we're going to be talking about. This is something we have to check in frequently on. So I'm honored that you wanted to come to this breakout session when there's so many cool ones going on, and hopefully you will leave today with an action plan of something you can do this fall to take care of yourselves and take some steps to have some resiliency factors and avoid your own secondary stress responses as much as possible. All right. So quickly, I know if you're here at the Trauma Institute, you know what trauma is. So I'm just going to kind of move quickly through what I'm talking about with trauma. When we talk about trauma, we're talking about a singular one-time stressful event, like a car accident or a significant crime that occurred. It was a one-time thing, nothing before it, nothing after. And that's one kind of trauma. We also talk about intermittent trauma. So we often think about trauma that can start and stop based on the kind of situation you're in for work or based on your family system. And hopefully by the time you're talking to a kid, if it's intermittent, it has stopped. It's not happening at that moment. And then there's ongoing trauma. I think of ongoing trauma as almost like something that the children don't see any end to, that there's no hope for it. So in their minds, there's hope for it for the kids though. And so those are the kind of traumas that kids might be coming to you and talking about. Really important if you're dealing with a child with ongoing trauma that's going on still in their lives, that you're aware of the higher level of risk to the child and to yourself in terms of how stressful that is, versus when they talk about in the past an intermittent trauma that has since ended, but it started and stopped many times. The importance of naming trauma can't be undervalued. We name trauma because it helps children and adults shift perspective and decrease negative responses that occur. So it's not glossing over it. It's not saying, this is no big deal. We name it. This is something that happened and it's a trauma. It was something that stressed us and scared us and deeply impacted and touched us. People experience trauma directly by experiencing it personally. You can witness it and be a bystander. You can learn about a trauma that happened to someone you're close to and care about, or you can have repeated and extreme exposure to details. Today, we're going to talk about the repeated and extreme exposure to details. Now, I know all of us are human beings and we might have directly experienced trauma or witnessed traumas going on, okay? That would be like if you've seen fights in the school, that might be something you've seen that was stressful to you, that was work related. Also, work related, you might experience a trauma where you might have been struck by a child. That isn't really the kind of trauma we're talking about today. We're talking really about number 4, the repeated and extreme exposure to details. Although number 3 shouldn't be undervalued. Knowing someone who's had something bad happen to them, and just even if the child didn't tell you directly, if perhaps one of your colleagues shares with you, hey, did you hear this happen to Sarah? And knowing Sarah and caring about Sarah, it can be very stressful to know that something bad happened to the child, that because you care about the child. So think about it this way. If you have a work colleague and you found out that they had been exposed to, let's say, COVID, how you would feel and how close that is to home and your worries you might have about it. So these are ways we can all experience trauma. The national statistic is 3 out of 5 American children experience trauma. It's a very sad statistic. Um, it's not just the children in our schools, we're talking about nationwide, the children. And you're vulnerable as an educator. You're vulnerable because you've built relationships with students. And those students want to tell you about their experiences. And keeping your relationship with them, you want to hear about their experiences. And, I've talked with teachers before who say to me, Laura, I came in that morning, I was ready to teach ELA. I did not expect what came out of the young child's mouth about her experience the night before. And it really can shake teachers up because you're going in expecting one set of activities that day, and it will completely shift your set of activities. And, it's such a compliment that the kids feel safe to tell you. Sometimes the kids don't really even realize that what they've experienced is a trauma. They're just telling you about something that happened the night before. I'm sure you've all had that experience where children relate something to you that is to them really normal and not upsetting at all. But when you hear it, like the hairs on the neck go up and you're like, oh, I got to get the social worker now. This is a big deal. And you have that relationship. So you're really vulnerable. You're the first person they might be telling. Also, learners act out trauma. Kids don't always have the words to tell us what happened. They might be showing us what happened. Behavior has meaning. So kids are coming in and acting something out, and you're witnessing secondarily what they experienced. You might not always connect that. You might think, why is he behaving this way, or why is she behaving this way? They might be showing you what happened, and it's very traumatic to sometimes watch kids do that. I had a student a few years ago who would repeatedly run into a matted wall to give himself a bloody nose. And I just couldn't figure out what was happening. But working with his mother, I learned that he had witnessed her be beaten repeatedly and get a bloody nose. So he was telling me that story, but he wasn't able to use words. Okay, so that can be very stressful as an educator to be watching over and over again without understanding what's happening. And then after understanding it, it's still pretty stressful to know what he was worried about and experiencing. Learners also come in and tell you details, especially if you're a secondary teacher, you might get a lot more detail than you expected. Also, I've had 5-year-olds come in and give me pretty graphic details, again, not realizing that what they experienced was traumatic. It might just be the norm for them. So these variables all make you really vulnerable. You might have heard the phrase compassion fatigue, or we're using the phrase secondary stress. It's very different from occupational burnout. Occupational burnout is not related to hearing about trauma, thinking about horrible things that have happened to your students. Occupational burnout is I'm tired of doing the same job over and over again. Occupational burnout can be easily fixed, usually with a few days off or a shift in routine. What we're talking about is compassion fatigue, where you're actually impacted and taking in the secondary stress. Okay. So I want to pause there. That's kind of a very quick review, and I know I'm going really fast, but we've all talked about PTSD before and what is trauma. Any questions about what we're talking about with trauma? We could be talking about knowing like the ongoing trauma of racism. We could be talking about that for knowing our students are going through that. We could be talking about children coming in and describing domestic violence. We could be talking about children discussing traumas that happened during COVID because their family was evicted and they were homeless, and experiences kids had during that time that were unsafe and frightening to them. And as an educator, you will be taking that in and absorbing it and carrying it with you as a caring person. Any questions? All right, I'm going to keep moving. Alicia, just interrupt me if there's any concerns, okay?
I will.
Okay, so there are 4 common responses from folks when you're starting to have secondary stress. And what I'd like you to do while you're listening to this is try to think, have you experienced any of these very common and normative responses? We're going to go through each one at a time with some more detail. So the first is intrusive thoughts. Intrusive thoughts can show up as having school nightmares, but also could be nightmares about things that the children have told you happened to them. It might be a variation on it. It might be the thing that happened to the child that the child told you about happening to you or another family member, or it might be a nightmare about the child and what they specifically told you. Intrusive thoughts also can include thinking about students outside the school day, and not like in a planning, oh, I can't wait to show them this book kind of way, but where you find your mind is drifting and you're thinking about the scary things that might be happening to the child, and you're finding yourself worrying about the child so much so that you can't control it. You might want to stop these thoughts, but you can't stop them. You also might be re-experiencing the stories told to you, and that can take form of physical sensations. It can take the form of not being able to deviate from that topic when thinking about the child. And when they're intrusive, these are thoughts that you can't stop, that you can't distract yourself from. Another way that secondary stress shows up for folks is feeling on edge. The clinical phrase for this is hypervigilance, but we've all kind of experienced hypervigilance at one point or another, where you feel sort of jumpy and more aware of things that are going on in your environment and having a disproportionate reaction to it. It's also that sense that something bad is coming or is going to happen, and you can't shake it. It's not based on facts. There's no reason to believe anything negative is coming. But after you've heard about negative things happening to people you care about, often there's just this overwhelming feeling that something bad is about to occur again. And this also can show up as irritability, of feeling really jumpy and kind of snappy when you aren't normally a snappy person. That's actually the symptom, the irritability that I personally will share with you. I struggled with the most when I was anxious. Is I wanted to be this calm and loving and peaceful source of support for people in my life, but I was so anxious about things that were going on with the kids at school. I often, when I was with the kids at school, would be snappy and irritable because I was worried for them. And of course, that's counterproductive, right? To be snappy or angry. Avoidance is another way that secondary stress can show up. You know, sometimes we avoid people related to school, and people will avoid PLCs, or they'll avoid going out for drinks with friends after school who work at school because they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to think about it. They want to separate as much as possible with it. Um, Also avoiding feelings that come up with thinking about school. And again, we're not talking about August avoidance of like, oh my gosh, I don't want to have a school nightmare, or it's hard to think about going back. I know, I've seen the sales too about back to school supplies. It's more talking, did we lose the screen? It's okay.
Yes, we did. I'm putting it back. I don't know
Okay.
how.
It's okay. I'll just keep going. Um, it's avoiding, I'm just going to look at my notes. It's avoiding the feelings that you have when thinking about that student, and avoid concerns about that. Um, Sometimes people will also avoid professional development that is around the issues that are triggering for them because it's too much and it's stressful and they don't enjoy it. Let's see if I can share it again.
There we go. All
There we go. I don't know what happened, but okay. Cool beans.
right.
We're back. Um, so when I started in the field of social work, I went and did a lot of trainings about trauma because I wanted to be a trauma specialist. And then about halfway through my career, I stopped wanting to go to trainings about trauma. I was just done. I needed a break from thinking about it. And ironically, those same trainings would have been giving me more tools to cope with the work that was causing me agita. But I started to just not want to go to PLC. I started not wanting to go to professional development. I wanted to read it on my own. I wanted to avoid being with other people when I was stressed. Oh, it's not letting me change the screen though. There we go. Oh, all right. The last is changes in how you're thinking and feeling. And look at this huge list. And it's because everybody thinks and feels kind of differently. But these are some of the ways that educators, when they're starting to have secondary stress, might experience a change in thinking. You might be feeling guilty that you have privilege in your life and you weren't aware before of the things that were happening to your learners. You might find yourself isolating a lot, avoiding friends, avoiding colleagues, when you're normally a social person. A feeling of hopelessness, like there's no way you can change it. There was a phrase when I started in the district, I think it's still a phrase that I hear kids say, it is what it is. It is, and we can radically accept that. But then we need to kind of move beyond feeling hopeless and say, but I want to change it. Disconnecting and not being present for students when they want to talk about things that are upsetting because it's too overwhelming. An example of this would be a few years ago, I had a student that I was very close to who died by a shooting. And after that, I really didn't want to hear anything about gang violence. I didn't want to hear about street violence. And it was too painful for me to continue to do that kind of work with students. Um, Anger can come up for people. Decreased creativity. You can't come up with creative solutions anymore. Excessive fatigue, not listening when the children are telling you things, becoming super critical of kids and colleagues, noticing mood changes, and cynicism, feeling like, wow, that is what it is, and sadness and grief that can be almost overwhelming to the point where you're not able to function. So, as we talk about these, you're exceptionally vulnerable because student populations include special education learners who might be more vulnerable to traumatic events. Um, Children who live in poverty are definitely more exposed to traumatic events and the trauma of experiencing poverty. Um, Alcohol and substance abuse is rampant in our culture at this point in time. It's almost impossible to avoid hearing about kids who've been exposed to substance abuse and substance abusing adults, and sometimes they're substance abusing. Think about our LGBT youth and how much trauma they experience with bullying in their households, in our community, in our society. And then we have a large immigrant population in our community, and that makes them vulnerable to trauma. And as you listen to the children's stories about their immigration experiences and their experiences with racism, you're also going to hear about trauma. You might have personal characteristics also that make you more likely to be vulnerable to secondary stress. And just something to be aware of if you've had your own trauma history that you might want to work through with a therapist, because talking to kids and hearing about their experiences can be very traumatic. You probably also have your own resiliency factors. Some of us have done our own work in therapy. Some of us have figured out some coping strategies and ways to feel good and take care of yourself. Um, and then we also have empathy. Empathy is a very highly uh, sought out quality and educators. We want educators who are empathic, but empathic people, and you've heard probably the phrase empaths, tend to absorb people's experiences carried around with them, and their energy gets shifted by that. So your personal characteristics might make you more vulnerable. And the school environment itself, if we have a culture that understands trauma versus a culture that minimizes it or shames people for having these experiences, can also make you more vulnerable. So there's 6 life domains that we want to spend some time discussing and figuring out if you've experienced any of the secondary stress symptoms in these domains, because what we're going to do is work really hard for the rest of the time together talking about an action plan. You're going to write yourself some SMART goals. Not really, but you could write yourself some SMART goals in a few of these areas. I wouldn't say all at once, right? Because if you have more than one goal, it's not realistic. But 6 life domains in general that are impacted. And I find it really helpful to think about the different domains, because sometimes it's easier to target your resiliency building in just one domain at a time. So if we notice that one domain is suffering, that might be where you want to target your intervention. Okay. So the occupational domain, when you're working, you might notice decreased morale, the avoidance, the irritability, sensitivity to criticism is also something to be aware of. That if you're getting feedback and you're finding yourself really irritated and feeling like people aren't understanding you at work, that might be a moment to pause and go, whoa, I'm experiencing some secondary stress in my occupational realm. There's also the emotional domain in your life where you have a hard time with dysregulated emotions. And I have a good friend, and he and I were talking the other day about watching Hallmark commercials. And I don't know if people still watch Hallmark commercials, but they used to make you cry, right? And he was like, I know I'm in a lot of trouble if I cry more easily at Hallmark commercials. And I'm like, all right, so he's having a hard time regulating his emotions when he sees these really sad commercials, right? By the way, that's a normal response. But if you're finding yourself really verklempt or coming up in tears a lot and really emotional and not able to regulate it and pull it back when you choose to, that might be a sign that you're having a hard time in your emotional domain. There's ways this shows up in your cognitive domain too, with having difficulty with organizational issues. You're forgetting things a lot. Your concentration seems off, and or you're making mistakes that you normally wouldn't make. Okay, this is beyond your normal baseline, because I know I have like older brain. And sometimes I forget things like, where did I leave the keys? This kind of goes beyond where you might normally never forget to log into a meeting, or it would be very atypical for you to misplace a packet that you were going to use with the kids, and then you can't find it, and you're going, whoa, this is not like me. And of course, the stress that comes with the cognitive change, and it impacts other domains like your occupational. Hold on for that. We'll get to that in just a second, because we are going to talk about that. I'm glad you're identifying. I'm hoping you're willing to share. Social domain can come up when you're both in school and out of school. And this is when you're distrustful, you isolate. You might feel ashamed of what's happening for you. You might feel embarrassment. You might experience some cynicism. Sometimes, just like how people avoid people from work, sometimes people find themselves avoiding their friends because they don't think their friends are going to understand, friends in other fields. Might not have the empath skills or even the interest in understanding how crazy our jobs are. I don't know if any of you have ever felt like, gosh, if you just worked in the building and you're talking to a friend, like you would understand this, but like if you don't work in the building, you don't get it, or you don't work in the field, you don't get it. And it's that sense of isolation. There can be physical domains, and this includes, by the way, heart rate changes, breathing changes, changes in how your digestive system's working. You might have more diarrhea, you might be constipated, you might have a hard time sleeping, or you might want to sleep more. We're talking about a change, not in one direction or the other. Weight gain typically goes with these changes. Sadly, it's in one direction. But taking care of yourself, we can balance that. Some people find they are self-medicating. They go home from work, and the only way they can relax is to have a glass of wine or a beer. Some of our colleagues will say, self-medication is the only way to get the day over with and dissociate from it. Really important at the end of physical, you see compromised immune system. Why I want to pause here is I know everybody who is at this trauma institute is bracing for fall and trying to think about how to be healthy and how to really keep your body and your family and your students as safe as possible with health issues. And that is one of the reasons why secondary stress is so important to be aware of. It can really wear you down. If you absorb a lot of secondary stress symptoms, it can impact your immune system's ability to fight off even just the common cold. So that's an area to really keep an eye on. And especially right now during a pandemic, take extra care of yourself. And then the final domain, spiritual, where you feel like you're questioning how could God do this, blaming a higher power. Some people stop going to church. Some people stop going to their worship community, but worship alone. But they definitely have described feeling a loss of comfort and peace in their higher power and their relationship with God. So a question emerged, I think I saw, what happens if it's in more than one? You're human. If it's in more than one, you're human. Um, and it's really hard not to have these bleed into each other, right? Because I don't know about you, but I experience my emotional domain while I'm at work. Let's hope we experience our cognitive domain. But so what ends up happening is these areas can overlap and really negatively impact each other. Likewise, they can overlap and positively impact each other when we start talking about our action plans and our solutions. So I'd like to pause here now that I've kind of gone through all of this, and I know this is a really big slide with a lot on it. Are people willing to share some of their experiences in these domains and how you're thinking about this and how it might have affected you to have secondary stress?
So Laura, one of the questions is, what if you can identify issues in more than one, maybe even all domains, and how do we prioritize?
How do you prioritize? Okay. Well, congratulations, you're human. I think that prioritizing one or two areas that, well, as we get to the solutions that appeal to you so that you can have some success will be important. Okay. The second thing is if you're really scoring high in these areas, I'm going to recommend at the end that you talk to somebody professional about self care. There's a survey that people can fill out as we do this. And I thought about sending it to all of you, but I'll be honest, I practiced this with someone else and they completed the survey and had like a total panic, like, oh my gosh, I'm a mess. And I'm like, that's not the point of this. The point isn't to get you worried and thinking you're a mess because we're all kind of messy. But so what we probably would want to do is if you're having a lot of symptoms of secondary stress in a number of life domains, we probably would want you to reach out and get some help through our EAP program. You also could reach out to me and we could talk about where does it make the most sense. And as we're going through the resiliency skills, I think in each life domain, there are going to be a few that stand out to you like, oh, I want to try that one, or I don't think that one's going to work for me, so I'm not even going to worry about it. Okay. So hang in there and we'll see if that comes up for people when we're doing the resiliency factors. The person who shared that, are you willing to share one or two examples of how you've been impacted by secondary stress? No? No willingness? Okay. Yes. Okay. Can we take that person off microphone? Oh, no mic. Okay. Okay. We can't take that person off mute.
Oh, I
I
think I'm
just
on.
unmuted you. Does that work?
Yes. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You know, uh, I can see a lot of this happening, and I will share. I don't know who else is in this meeting, so if any of my teammates at Oneida are on this meeting, this is my reaction. Personal. It's not directed at any person, but we had a team meeting earlier this week to talk about going back, and going back seems so amorphous right now. And what I found was by the time the meeting was over, my stress level was through the roof. And this manifests itself in not wanting to do anything. Oftentimes, I'm baking sourdough bread daily and crocheting. And so I'll just say, well, I'm going to crochet for a half hour, then I'll get back to my work. And then I don't do it. And of course, my weight has gone up since we started to stay home. And I'm also doing things to change these things. But that made me want to retire. That I was so stressed. I thought maybe it's time for me to leave the profession. Now I talked with a friend afterwards, and that kind of brought me down. But it's just, does that answer your question? Like, that's what I'm thinking. I'm trying to figure out how can I put these concerns into in a place that doesn't cause such disruption in my motivation to stay in the profession that I love so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think going back to school is going to be triggering for many, many people because we've all been living in trauma and fear of experiencing COVID, right? We don't want anyone we know to have COVID. We don't. And I know personally, whenever I hear about someone near or far, it's terrifying to me. And I want to know all the details. I want to know how it started. I want to know what the signs were. I want to know that the person's going to be okay. And then knowing that we're going to go back to school and possibly be putting ourselves and the children we love and care for at risk because we all don't really know, right? We're trying our best with what we know today. Might be different in December. So it can be very triggering. And I appreciate you being willing to share that experience. And you're describing avoidance. And, we talk about fight, flight, or freeze. It sounds like you freeze a little bit. And just being aware of that, and the freeze happens for you with occupational stuff like, whoa, maybe I need to take a break, avoid it. And my hope is as we get to the next few slides where we talk about ways to build in resiliency, there'll be a few that you go, I want to write this down and make this my plan, which by the way, I'm going to challenge everybody here to write down some strategies that they're willing to try. Okay. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for being willing to share because truthfully, if people have known me over the years, I thought I didn't have secondary stress symptoms, and I so clearly did. And looking at, and still do, by the way, on a day-to-day basis, this isn't a one-shot deal. This is something that we have to be aware of and keep our eyes and ears open for ourselves. If someone had told me, by the way, Laura, I really think that you're experiencing secondary stress, I probably would have given them a pretty irritable reply. So Alicia's laughing because she's known me a long time. I would have been like, no, I'm fine. Which in and of itself is a great example of how hard it is to breach these symptoms because we had a school culture going on at the time that it might not have been completely safe to talk about this. And I do think we're getting to a much better place with administrators understanding that we need to be vulnerable and talk about these issues and talk about how loving the kids so deeply and knowing them and being authentic with them and listening is impacting us. It does. It impacts us. It's a symbiotic thing here, guys. It goes back and forth. It's reciprocated. So that means if it bothers us too much, we're going to transfer that back to the kids too. And that's another good motivational reason to get this stuff controlled because we don't want to make things more challenging for the children. We want to transfer to them calm, peace, and loving energy when we're teaching them. Yeah. Were there other, I thought I saw another bullet come up, but I couldn't see it.
No, it was just saying like, no, Mike, and thank you.
Okay. Okay, good. All right. So, if you've ever experienced your own traumatic events in your life, which again, we're human and we all were children. So remember that statistic, 3 out of 5, we were all children at one time. So 3 out of 5 of us might have had some traumas in childhood. Some of this stuff might already be going on for you, not as secondary traumatic stress, but as your own primary traumatic stress. And then being re-exposed to it with the children might intensify and make these symptoms harder to manage too. Okay, so let's keep going. I just realized it's 10:05. So when the self-care movement really became pronounced, I was a naysayer. I was like, really? That's like one more thing to do. I've got a lot of stuff on my plate. And now it's one more thing that I feel ashamed that I'm failing about. Um, and it kind of powerless, you feel powerless as it is, but it kind of reinforced like, oh, you can't manage this too. There are significant obstacles to self care. And I want to pause for a second and just acknowledge that for people. But like, this is not an easy task. And even though I'm smiling and I'm being cheerful and laughing about it, taking care of yourself and prioritizing yourself, it takes work. And it's not always the kind of work that we want to put on the top of the list, you know? And I kind of like what Dr. Archidiakono shared a few minutes ago about like she wanted to go knit or crochet and bake bread. And I went, I'm kind of proud of her for doing that because you know that's self-care and she shouldn't be ashamed that she's having a hard time right now, you know. I think we've as a culture come a ways away from busyness culture, but we still have a lot of emphasis on, you know, what did you do today, what was the best part of your day. We ask children all the time, what did you do over the weekend, you know. And there's this sense of like people need to be doing, we need to be accomplishing. And the self-care movement initially fit right into that and said, well, are you taking care of yourself? No. And people would come forward and say, I'm having secondary stress. And supervisors would knowingly nod and go, yeah, it's because you don't take care of yourself. And we're like, okay, one more task I'm supposed to fit into the day, right? So that is not the purpose of this presentation at all. It's to acknowledge this is hard stuff and we're going to fail at it. Practice is going to make progress. I'm going to say that again. Practice will make progress. There is no perfect with this. There's no end point with this. It's not like, oh, you hit it, check it off the list and it's over. That's not what we're talking about. So in your occupational domain, name the problem. Dr. Archidiakono named it. She said that meeting, talking about going back to work, how big the situation is of going back in and keeping everyone safe. That was the stressor for her. She was able to name the problem, okay? And, you know, for me, being able to name, I get really exhausted from listening to repeated stories about traumatic events because I'm a therapist, I'm a trauma specialist. No one comes in to tell me, oh, I got a new hat and I'm feeling happy today, right? People come in to tell me, oh, Ms. D, this is what happened. And knowing that that's what the stressor is, really important to just be able to name it. When we name problems, we can manage problems, but we have to accept that there's a problem to begin with. It's a radical acceptance idea that like, okay, this is the reality. I don't like it right now. I can work to shift it, but I'm going to sit with it and that I'm uncomfortable. That's hard too. So name the problem. Try to attend as much PD as possible if you're finding yourself in occupational, like a freeze or a flight mode. PD is so healing because it gives you opportunities to learn new ideas that might excite you and make you want to face the challenges. The other cool thing about PD is you realize you're in a room with other people or in a Zoom with other people um, who are in the same boat. And whether they're saying, oh my gosh, I find this so stressful or not, they're there, they're with you. Meet with your colleagues to discuss kids too, and make sure that you're authentic with them about what you're hearing from the children. Don't keep that information to yourself. That means if a child shares with you in confidence something really upsetting that happened, you need to have colleagues who can maintain confidentiality that you know you could go to and say, this child shared this really upsetting thing with me. I'm really concerned for that child. I have heard over and over through the years, people feel like in education they can't share what happened because they're afraid their colleague won't maintain confidentiality. We are all professionals. We need to be able to acknowledge that we need to talk about this stuff, but also that it's very damaging for you to own and be the only person holding that child's story. We all are working with kids. We need to be able to share it safely. So make sure you have that conversation with colleagues. Make sure you find 1 or 2 people in the building that you're sure can handle that responsibility. It might be your PPS staff. I'm hopeful that your teams can handle that conversation too. Okay, boundaries around work hours. This is hard for me. I'm going to tell you that I know that the social workers are supposed to work like 40 minutes longer in the day, PPS staff are. I easily work an hour or 2 longer every day. And this is something I'm sharing with you because I mess this up all the time. I go in way too early because my children are grown and I'm a morning person, and then it's really hard for me to leave. But having boundaries around when you leave and leaving work at work and knowing that things can be undone, left undone and completed the next day, really important. When you go on vacation, please unplug. Don't take your cell phone on the beach with you and read your work emails. The other thing is remembering to use supervision and support. That means being able to talk with someone through the clinical supervision. I don't mean supervision around your lesson plans. I mean supervision clinically around talking about how you're feeling and how your experiences with the children impact your feelings. So those strategies, think about those. Those might be, if you identified with the occupational area, you might want to pick 1 or 2 of those to try out between now and September 15th. That's your target date, by the way, on your goal card that we're going to do. Emotional strategies. Bolster your resilience. Resilience means your ability to bounce back. So it's staying flexible. And how do we do that? We do hobbies. When the pandemic started, I picked up needle felting. Now, you use wool to needle felt, and if anybody knows me, I'm allergic to wool. My children laughed. They were like, only you would pick up a hobby that you're allergic to. But I made little, you use wool and you hit a pin to it, and I made little animals and gave them to my students. That was my hobby. But I also made them and turned them into mobiles for friends, and it was kind of a fun, mindless activity to do. But Dr. Archidiakono shared she crochets and bakes sourdough. I mean, hobbies can be painting your toenails. Hobbies can be tending to your farm if you have a farm. Hobbies can be gardening. Hobbies can be reading a book, okay? Meditation, very hard. Meditation is sitting with your thoughts. That is an advanced skill for self-care. And while it comes up over and over and over again in all the literature, I'm going to warn you, if you want to try meditation, I'm going to warn you, it shouldn't be tried with high expectations initially. It should be started really slow amounts, meaning 1 or 2 minutes at a time, and very accepting knowing practice makes progress. The nice thing about meditation is if you practice it enough, you can actually get yourself into a meditative state, even when you're in the middle of a school day, but it takes a long time. So that probably wouldn't be a first go-to goal. Art. A lot of people find creating art is very good for bolstering their resilience. Going out to nature, being outside. And of course, therapy. There's no shame in talking to a therapist. And Alicia's a therapist, I'm a therapist. You know, therapists struggle with these issues too, but being able to go in and say, I'm struggling at work, name the problem for your therapist and talk through the emotional needs. Some cognitive strategies. These are kind of things that I don't think people always think about, but you want to build some new skills and challenge yourself outside of work. That keeps your brain sharp. So practicing an instrument, learning a new language, practicing a craft, doing puzzles, keeping that brain going and keeping your mind sharp. So those would be cognitive interventions that you'd be willing to try out. Here's some solutions for social domain stressors. Cultivating a supportive social network. That includes celebrating life events, making sure that you celebrate people's birthdays, anniversaries. You know, I try to celebrate something every week. And I know that sounds really kind of silly and like it's mundane, but if we don't celebrate the good stuff that's going on, we're going to lose sight of it. And that's one of the symptoms actually of secondary stress is you don't feel joy in celebrating anymore. Coffee dates. Coffee dates are really, and by the way, if you don't like coffee, it's okay. You can make it a milkshake date, make it a soda date, make it a tea date. But the idea of a coffee date is that it's a set time that you know you're going to be social and have fun. Okay, and that includes the next one, leaving work on time for meetups with friends. I have a good friend that just retired from Mohonasen Central Schools after like 30 years of being a school social worker. I'm so happy for her and jealous. And she and I would meet once a month for coffee on a Friday at 4 o'clock to make sure we were both done. That was the weekend. That had to stop. So, now she's retired. I'm going to have to find somebody else for a coffee meetup on Friday to get me out on time. Unless I've learned that skill, which I haven't. By the way, practice makes progress. Physical. Okay, guys, I know this seems so common sense, but you gotta eat. And I say that because I know when I work in the building, I forget to eat. I get so wrapped up in the day that I'm not eating. And then when I am eating, I'm shoving stuff in my mouth and I'm not mindfully enjoying it. So setting aside a little bit of time, it doesn't have to be a whole half an hour, but a little bit of time every 3 hours to make sure you're putting something in your mouth that you're mindful of. Drinking water. There was a very well-known therapist, Dr. Macy, came through Schenectady quite a few years ago after we had lost a number of children to suicide. And one of the things he kept reinforcing is make sure we're drinking water because your brain works better on water. Okay. Your body does too. Your heart does too. Make sure you're sleeping 8 to 10 hours a night. That means you have to go to bed earlier. It doesn't mean you can sleep later because I know we've all kind of gotten used to a later schedule, but we're going to be getting up earlier. So right now we should be starting to learn how to wind back down and get into bed earlier. And exercise. And I don't mean pounding your body and hurting yourself. I mean doing fun things, movement that's fun, that's intentional. Okay. Going for a walk with a friend. Hey, there you've married 2 domains. Okay. Avoiding alcohol and drugs, super important when you're having signs of secondary stress. Alcohol and drugs can make these symptoms a lot more intense. And you're going to end up in a situation that a clinician would call acute. If you are drinking and you are using any marijuana or other drugs, it can become very dangerous very quickly. And in the spiritual realm, we want you to find some time to find meaning again in life. And I didn't say meaning in work, I meant meaning in life. Like, why are you here? Do you know why you're here? It might have to do with work, but it might not. And that's okay too. Finding time for prayer and meditation and self-reflection. So, on the spiritual area, some people find turning to a pastor or priest or rabbi really important to re-engaging with this. Some people find turning to scripture or whatever book they use to ground themselves in their understanding really important. And some people find doing this on their own, just meditating, really important. But that question of like, why are you here? And remembering it, really important. Okay, so this is the part I'm really excited about. Before we move on, any questions about any of that? No? Okay. So wherever you are, I want you to think about writing yourself an action plan. What obstacles are you going to have to doing this? Are you going to feel guilty for taking time for yourself? Do you just not feel motivated right now because you're kind of low energy and you're feeling yuck? What are the obstacles? Because whatever they are, we're going to have to shift that a little bit and recognize it. So the first step in shifting an obstacle, radical acceptance. It's how you feel. That's what's going on right now. But how are you going to shift that? And just be aware of it. So an obstacle for me is that I feel a lot of guilt when I take time away from kids or time away from work, clients, to take care of me. So I have to remember the oxygen mask. That's how I manage it. Of being on an airplane. Do you guys remember when we could take airplane rides places and not be afraid of getting a virus? So they used to say, if you're traveling with small children, there are going to be these oxygen masks that drop down if there's a change in pressure. And they used to say, please put on your oxygen mask before you put on your child's. And I used to think in my head, no way. I'm going to put on my kid's oxygen mask first. And then, of course, my children would be in the awkward situation of watching their mother pass out. So I remind myself of that all the time, that the kids need me to be the best Ms. D I can be. So if taking 10 minutes and sitting in my car and drinking some water and doing some breathing, it takes away from 10 minutes of me being in the room. As long as no one's in crisis, no one's going to get hurt. I can do that. and remembering the oxygen mask, okay? But know your obstacle. It might be motivation. It might actually be time. Practice this only in small blocks. Don't be like, I'm going to do all 17 of these ideas and I'm going to do it for an hour a day. No, like, do you remember what I said about the meditation goal? Initially, try 2 minutes, literally, like set your timer and try 2 minutes of meditation and mindful breathing. Mindfulness is really hard, by the way, because thoughts come up, especially if you're experiencing secondary stress, that you have to experience that are uncomfortable. And I don't want to leave you there in that uncomfortable place for longer than 2 minutes. Okay. Exercise, practice in small blocks. I'm not saying you're going to exercise 7 days a week. If you are right now exercising 1 day a week, maybe say I'm going to exercise 2 days a week. If you're not exercising at all, maybe you're going to try 1 day a week for 10 minutes. Little tiny blocks. Practice makes progress. I don't want anybody telling me they're perfect at this, because perfect is a destination that no one can ever really reach. And if you do get there, it means you're done. And who wants to be done? So let's be realistic, and let's create a school culture among ourselves that values self-care. So that means you're going to have an accountability buddy. And I was kind of hoping when we did this meeting, I would be able to see everybody in it. But I want you, and I don't know if you can see everybody in it, but I want you to notice if anybody's on this call that you know, or think of a teammate that could be your accountability buddy, because you're going to tell that person your goal. And your goal is going to be one or two of the interventions we talked about in one or two life domains. It's not going to be more than that. It's going to be specific and measurable. That means you're going to name the behavior you're going to replace your stressors with. You're going to list amount of time and a measurement date. So you're going to measure it, and I'm going to say by September 15th, because by then we will have been back at school a little bit, and we can see how you're doing between now and September 15th using that intervention. How much have you been able to use it successfully? Okay? Make sense? All right. So there's some resources at the end of this, some articles, but I want to pause here and point out that we have, we're really lucky. We have an EAP program that you can access from the district's website and get some free counseling. And in the interest of being a supportive presenter, I accessed the EAP program. I actually did it last year because I was having some secondary stress. And it's really easy to use. You call a phone number, you give them the information, you tell them what you're experiencing. They set you up with an appointment. They have an office on Franklin Street here in Schenectady, but they have offices throughout the capital region. So you could go to any of them. It's not long-term therapy. You're committing to a few sessions to see if you can make some slight adjustments, okay? It's not deep psychoanalysis. It's solution-oriented. And my hope is that if you're struggling with any of these symptoms, you consider getting that set up now rather than waiting until September or October. We also have on our behavior specialist website for the district, I'm not a behavior specialist, but I deeply admire the work that they do and want you to know they have an entire section on self-care. So if you want to review any of that, please know that that's there. That's a resource. And my email is the district email. It's my last name, L, and I'm pretty responsive to email. So if you have questions about this or you want to share your victories with me about this, I would love that. And I could be your accountability buddy if you need an accountability buddy. I will check back with anyone who emails me what their goal is that's measurable by September 15th and say, where are you at with this? Okay. So thank you for listening to me babble on for about an hour. Does anybody have any questions or concerns about this topic or just further thoughts they want to share? The details of the plan. All right. Yes. So you're going to pick, you know what? If you would like, I will send you this PowerPoint, Dr. Archidiacono. You're going to pick from all of these slides, one or two of these that you're going to be willing to try. You're going to pick up, you're going to set an amount of time that you're willing to try it for each week, and you're going to measure it between now and September 15th. Now, I say each week, some of these goals, like attending PD, you're doing it right now. I don't know how realistic it is to do PD every week, but some of these goals, like, all right, you decide you want to target the emotional domain. You're going to try to bolster resilience by taking up a hobby, and you're going to do your new hobby activity for 10 minutes a day, 4 days a week, just like an IEP goal. Okay. And then we're going to count and tally. How much did you actually do it? And practice makes progress. I don't like people who are perfect. Neither do you, Dr. Archie, I know, because we've been friends a long time. We celebrate our messiness. And you might choose like a cognitive strategy. So I'll share with you, I decided last night, I really am bad at puzzles and I get really frustrated with them. And so I am starting a new puzzle activity to see if I can overcome my distress tolerance and work with my distress tolerance on that. And I'm doing 10 minutes of a New York Times puzzle every day. And for me, letting it go at 10 minutes, really hard because I want to finish it. And for me, letting it go and saying, that's it. And I know it's going to disappear tomorrow, by the way. I can't go back to it. And leaving that incomplete, I'm getting to practice my distress tolerance. Okay. My partner thinks it's hysterical because I'm like, oh, the timer went off, but I just want to do a few more. And he's like, put the phone down, put the phone down. So he's my accountability buddy. All right. He's keeping track of what I'm doing. But picking one or two of these strategies, like for you, Dr. Archie, you had shared physical symptoms. You might want to put on yours that you're going to try to sleep more and drink more water. I think I remember somebody once telling me they wanted to take more steps. So that's a measurable goal to see if that calms you down. Okay. If spiritual might be, more challenging. I know that when I've gone through secondary stress episodes, I've reached out to priests in the area that I value tremendously, and I set up a meeting with him. And just setting up that meeting with him was a strategy. It was hard for me to get off my inertia and enough energy to actually call him, name my problem, and set that up. So if that's one of your interventions or contacting EAP, you may say that's the whole goal. You're going to call EAP and set up an appointment before the first day of school. But make sure it's a measurable SMART goal. All right. I know you all know what they are because y'all are setting them all the time for your students. I'm asking you to use that goal for yourself. Okay. Oh my gosh, it's 10:27. Any other questions?
If anybody has any questions and they want me to unmute you, just put that in the chat, please.
Well, thank you so much for coming, and thank you for prioritizing your self-care. And if you have a question and you don't want it to be recorded, what I'm going to do is look in my email in a few minutes, and you can send me your question, and I'll email you back too. Okay? So, guys, be good to yourselves. Be gentle with yourselves. This is probably the hardest year I've ever been a social worker. I think 9/11 was pretty hard. But this just, there's no rival really to it. And I want you to know that this is important, this self-care, because you got to put that oxygen mask on first because you don't want the kids standing over you watching you passed out on an airplane. Okay? All right. All right. Namaste. The light in me honors the light in each of you. Go out there and shine. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.